Welcome to Opportunity Accelerators, the show where professionals at any stage can learn how to level up their career from those that have found success and have the scars to prove it. Our goal for this show is to provide business mentorship and maybe some inspiration in a podcast. But we also touch on other topics in the tech industry, in particular, how we can close the tech skills gap in the US by creating more and better pathways to advance tech careers. Opportunity Accelerators is brought to you by Skillstorm, the pioneers of and leaders in TechForce by Design. Skillstorm custom designs, builds, and deploys cohesive US-based tech teams at scale for our enterprise and government clients. At Skillstorm, our purpose is to accelerate opportunity. That is to enable our stormers and customers to go further faster as a result of their relationship with Skillstorm. I'm Vince Verga, along, as always, with my friends, co-hosts, and business partners, the king of company culture, Justin Vianello, and the pharaoh of the flywheel, Joe Mitchell.
Look at those headphones. What a thing of beauty. Joe's going to hear everything we say so loudly and clearly. I'm looking forward to his input with those bad boys.
The high priest of headphones.
Those studio monitors too?
Those are huge.
God knows what he's listening to. So, well, you just heard a little bit from our guests. So today we'd like to welcome Greg Sarafin. He is a leader in business consulting and technology. Greg is currently the global managing partner for Ernst & Young's Alliance ecosystem, where his strategic foresight and leadership have been pivotal in growing revenue and setting the global strategy for the firm's partner ecosystem. In his previous role at EY, he was a principal for Global and Americas Alliances. And prior to EY, Greg worked at IBM as a managing partner in banking and finance and as a global relationship partner. Outside of work, Greg loves traveling. He enjoys binge watching TV shows and is an enthusiastic foodie and devoted dad to 3 adult children. So Greg, we're excited to learn about your story and your career. So welcome. Thanks for being on.
Greg.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Greg can also sing a bit of karaoke. You left that out of his intro.
Oh, let's hope there's no video of that.
Well, it's for sale, Greg. So,
yes. So Greg, I want to kick us off. So you've traveled the world. You do a lot of traveling. Both for business and for pleasure. We know you're a devout foodie. You and I have chatted on a couple of occasions, and you've mentioned some very interesting places that you're either visiting when I talk to you or have visited. Can you share with us some place that no one would think about, where you've had awesome food, awesome wine, and just an awesome experience?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I had a recent experience with some colleagues and the gentleman who I've worked for the last 6 years at EY, a really awesome person named Jay. And Jay, among many incredible things, owns a winery in the country of Georgia. Not the state of Georgia where I live sometimes, but the country. And I had never been to Georgia. Incredible. It's like, usually you travel a lot, right? And you kind of have a feel for, even if you haven't been there, you have sort of a feel for what you're going to run into. I had no clue. Like what I thought and where we got to was completely different. Georgia people are wonderful. There's only 4 million of them. It's a very small country, nestled in the Caucasus Mountains, and wine country up north in the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains is some of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Guys, I highly recommend it. I should probably get a job working for the Georgia Tourist Bureau at this point. But, and Georgia, as you may know, is part of the world where wine was first made. It dates back 3,000 years there.
Wow.
And they still use some of the old methods, including Jay at his winery, of making wine. So we had 3 wonderful days of eating Georgian food, most of which is locally sourced and very fresh and healthy, and drinking Georgian wine, which is absolutely delicious. I mean, it's as good as any wine you've had anywhere, or, Napa, or, pick a wine region around the world. So, and it's those experiences that I like the best, because life's the journey, right? And the more that you try different things, I think the richer the journey becomes. So that's one I highly recommend if you have the means to do it. Go to Georgia.
And Greg, what are they known for, their reds or their whites? And what's a dish that you would recommend in that area?
So the Georgians have. So I wouldn't recommend it because it's not healthy. So I should be recommending unhealthy things. But it seems like every culture has their version of pizza, or like a quesadilla, or something that's bread and cheese.
Yep.
Right.
And their version of bread and cheese is really, really good. Their cheese there is delicious. And I apologize, I've already forgotten all the Georgian words I learned a while ago, so I'm not going to be able to name it, but it's not hard to find. And they also have versions that have meat filling and even bean paste filling, which are quite delicious. So that was kind of a highlight. But I also really liked every meal came with fresh vegetables. They eat a lot of tomatoes in that country. They eat a lot of eggplants in that country. There was also like what I would characterize as like a Georgian version of an eggplant rolantini, but much healthier with walnuts instead of cheese. That was another one that I really, really liked. And then, of course, lots of meat. Lots of really good meat.
Oh, yes. I like that.
Amazing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think one of the, you've had an exceptional career, had a global alliance as IEY. Really curious as to how you started off. I know you got a computer science degree, but, what was the passion behind pursuing a degree in computer science in the early 80s when I got my headphones? And how did you take your first steps in your career after you got that degree, and was it what you expected?
So right out of the gate, my career was not what I expected. As you noted, I did my undergraduate degree in computer science and engineering. So I got a BS. And back then, this is the early 80s, you got to remember, my freshman year of college was also the fall that they introduced the IBM PC, just to anchor us in history.
Right. Wow.
Now, I'd been using microcomputers for years before that, Apples and Tandies and whatever else. But the IBM, as everybody will recall, is really when PCs went mainstream into corporate America and everything changed. So that was a very exciting time, and things were going great, but circumstances changed financially for my family, and I ended up having to pay for a lot of, or actually all of college, ultimately. And so I needed to make more money than I could make being a bouncer at the bar or working at the McDonald's. So I actually sold my first deal in 1983, which really ages me now when I say that, because that's like, 41 years ago? That's terrible. But I sold what we would now call IT outsourcing ago. There was a company in Philadelphia where I was going to college. One of my fraternity brothers, his father was like a principal there, and I sold him a Novell NetWare implementation on PCs. Like most people don't even know what the hell a Novell is, right? You have to be a certain age to remember that company, but people don't realize back then there was no Windows, there was only MS-DOS, and there was no way to connect computers together natively. You had to have a third party do it. Anyway, that's too much information. So what happened is I basically built a small business while I was in college. And then instead of doing what I thought I was going to do when I finished, which was go to graduate school and then go to IBM, I just said, screw it, I'm making too much money, I'm having too much fun. So I just kept going forward with that business for another 14 years. It evolved, took twists and turns. It ultimately ended up not being IT outsourcing because that became a scale game. So bigger companies, kind of took that business away from me. But I then ultimately ended up doing custom application development for large corporates. And then I had this really weird thing where we had this idea about a startup. So a bunch of us did a startup for 3 years, raised a bunch of money, spent it, didn't produce any value, but it was a great lesson learned. It's a good bar story.
No,
I was a founder.
I would love to dig into that more, but you were a founder on more than one occasion by the sounds of it. So, in the first company that you set up while you were at college to help fund your college education, what were some of the pivotal lessons that you learned, setting up that? Because, that's a very difficult thing to do, go to college and to, fund your own education while you're there and support your family.
Yeah, I mean, saying it now and looking back on it, I agree with that statement. But at the time, you're a kid, you don't know any better. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, I got to go make some money. How am I going to do that? Oh, selling my body's not going to work, so I got to think something smarter than that. So I don't know, because I was in technology. I was building computers. That was our curriculum. You had to build them and program them. So I said, well, there's this. I know everybody's trying to network these PCs together. I know how to do it because I've done it at the university. So
Yeah.
let me see if I can go make some money at it. That's really how it started.
Right. Yeah.
But here's the thing:
So
I
is it?
did learn very quickly. I learned how to sell, and I was able, even as a kid, to go and talk to people that were 20, 30 years older than me and convince them that I could come in and actually make an impact and receive reasonable money for that. So that was really an interesting thing to learn, was how to make the bridge, Joe, from being an engineer, which is what I was sort of focused on, to, oh, there's this whole thing called selling, and if you want to eat, you kind of got to do it. So that was the big leap for me. Fortunately, I was decent at it, decent enough anyway. And then, of course, like
Right.
all of us that are producers in our careers, you just keep working at it and getting better and better at it. And that's really my story.
Yeah, I didn't know you started in sales, Greg, and that's interesting. I
It
started
wasn't on
my
purpose.
yeah, I started my career in sales as well. So a couple questions. First, I'd be curious to hear just your philosophy on sales, generally speaking. What do you think made you effective at it?
Yeah.
And then secondly, I think a lot of people that are really good individual contributors, it could be anything, it could be programming, it could be sales, to be able to move into a leadership role, sometimes they find that challenging. Maybe you were kind of forced to do it because, it was a small company, but talk about that journey. First of all, your sales career and how you're effective there, and then making that transition to becoming more of a leader.
So I always use sales as an opportunity to create value with your customer. That's where I start. I don't say, hey, I have this product here and I'm going to try to convince you to buy it. Because to me, that doesn't, first of all, that doesn't work on me. And second of all, I don't think that really works for the customer either. So to me, I've always been about what is the outcome my customer needs? And then how can I bring the tools in my kit, both the products and services that I have, but also thinking about how to apply them to whatever outcome my customer is trying to achieve, for them to view that as a win-win, for them to view it as, yep, there's going to be a value exchange. They're going to pay me. That's always part of it. But in exchange for that, working with me and the team, they're going to get a return on that is a multiple.
Mm-hmm.
And I find when you approach it and think about it that way, it's I would never say selling is easy, because anything you do where you're trying to convince somebody else to do something they might not otherwise do, it's always an interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say it makes selling joyful, right? Because when you do sell something, it's not that you've thrown your product over the transom, it's that you've now entered into an arrangement and a relationship with that counterparty to turn that into value for them. And that, to me, is the exciting part about it. So that's my philosophy, really. It has been always.
And then making that transition, from from an individual contributor that's effective at selling into being more of a leader and managing teams and hiring and all that kind of stuff. What advice would you give to help somebody be successful in that kind of transition?
So it's interesting. I struggled. I was pretty good right out the gate at the selling part, but the leadership part took me some time to figure out. Partly because we're all the products of our upbringing and our sort of our genetic code as well. And I was borderline spectrum in my approach to the world. And I'm one of these people that has like an unfortunate shortness of patience for people that can't execute in the way that I would expect them to execute. And so early on in my career in particular, that was really a derailment factor. I think the thing that ultimately kind of broke through for me was to realize, look, if you were to run a team with a bunch of yous, you would be the opposite of successful, right? Because you would not have any diversity of opinion or thought, and you'd be basically locked in a bubble of your own creating. you'd have groupthink immediately, like right out the gate.
Sure.
So to me, is when I realized, oh yeah, here's the memo that you really should read, Greg. It was like, okay, it was actually with a client, and I'd been driving the team down a path, and two of the teammates had been saying, Greg, we really don't think that's the right way to go, and you should reframe your thinking. And I just overran them, and then we failed. And I said, you know what? There are different ways of thinking about things, and the more differentiation that you can bring together. And then that's when it came to me. It's like, okay, your job is to set vision and maybe an informed strategy, but when it comes to execution, you've got to let your team execute. You've got to give them space. You may recognize that in each instance you might have done something differently, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the ultimate outcome is still a great outcome, and the team is empowered and feeling good about what they're doing, because then that translates to what I said earlier. Ultimately, what you want your team to do is create value for their customers. That's very simply what we want to do as societies, right? That's how we get GDP growth. When the more value we create, the more better we team across the all the different companies and economies of the world, the better off all of us are. So that was really the breakthrough for me. And then once I realized, okay, you've got to give people space. You've got to have diversity on your team. It's good that not everybody thinks about the same way as you do. That's when I had my breakthrough. And then that's when my career really started to click and, elevate at a higher pace.
And quick follow up on that, Greg, did you have any mentors along the way just who really helped you understand and figure out how to be a better leader?
Well, see, later in my career, I've had a number of mentors, including the Jay who I mentioned earlier, who has the winery, right? But I've had but my first 15 years, no, because I was I thought I had all the answers. I was one of those guys, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't take advantage of situations where I could have been mentored. Now, I always was studied of what people do well and what they do not so well. So in a sense, I've always been a student and watched people, but it wasn't until later in my career when I started to let people give me advice or ask help. But once you start doing that, you realize, yeah, this is a smart thing to do, and it's very helpful. But unfortunately, I was a slow learner. Wasn't until I was well into my 30s when I started doing that.
Well, we all got to put our hand on the hot stove a few times.
Yeah.
So, Greg, you travel a lot, you work a lot. You're the father to three kids. How over the years have you balanced your career and the growth of your career, and you've been very successful in your career, with managing a family as well?
It's interesting. I would say that I over-indexed on my career, but I was fortunate that my partner, the mother of my children, was really good at managing or making up for my only being around on weekends. But the truth is, for much of my children, certainly my younger children, my older, maybe I was around a little more when I was younger, but I was in a household where I was out in the field and traveling quite a bit, and now what I did do is make sure that I was highly, highly involved on the weekends, right? So my children always had a lot of activities. They all did, sports and other things, and so I never missed any of those things. Like on the weekends were sacred, and nothing was going to stop me going to a baseball game or a hockey game or whatever they were doing, or whatever school thing they were doing. So that part I was actually pretty good at. But look, the reality is, each family has their own situation. Sometimes both parties are in the workforce pretty heavily, and they need third-party help for the day-to-day in their household. In other cases like mine, my spouse decided that she would give up her law career to focus on the family and raising the children, which allowed me the luxury of being able to then be a weekend parent and partner.
And so, like, when you read the biographies of, many successful people, almost all of them always say something very similar. They over-indexed on their career, and then when they look back, they wish they'd spent more time. And and it's a hard thing for a lot of people to balance. So when you look back on that, and I look back, and I've traveled a lot too, and I have done a lot of that weekend, traveling with sports teams and alike. So I'm just curious to know, when you look back and if you're advising, young families today, is there any advice you would give there? Because obviously a lot of people want to be incredibly successful, but you also have to balance that. Or is it case by case?
I mean, my view, first, a couple things. One, my oldest is 35 now, and I still have a great relationship. So to me, your relationship with your kids is multi-decades. It's not just when they're young.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think you need to over-index on that first couple of decades to say that defines or doesn't define your relationship with your children.
For sure.
The second thing is, I think you have to be true to yourself, and I think you and your partner have got to decide how each of you is in your true self. I mean, I would not have changed anything. I'm not one of those people that says, "Oh, if I had it to do over again, I would have traveled less or focused on my career." It's my DNA. I'm 60 years old, and I'm still looking forward to at least 20 years of career, maybe more.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm not.
Yes.
This is just too fun.
Yes.
I feel like I play a sport. I feel like I'm getting up and I'm playing for Vince. I'm playing for the Miami Heat. If that's not a sore point right now.
I think they could use your help.
So I don't feel like I work. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm in the flow of life. I'm in the flow, and I'm enjoying it. And by the way, as you guys know, when you enjoy a professional career that exposes you to a lot of people in a lot of places in the world, it's really satisfying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like in a way that is hard to replicate in any other fashion.
Yeah. And you can feed off it.
All over the world that I've made.
Yes.
Awesome people that I have met and made friends with all over the world. And it gives you a perspective. It gives you a set of experiences. So no, I don't regret what I did. I work hard to have the best relationship I can with my children in the constraints of the time that I have with them. That has always been true. I try to be a good father and a good mentor where it makes sense to be a mentor. And that's my advice. Be honest with yourself. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're somebody like me who would really be unhappy if you took a professional role where you were at least home for dinner every night, but you were misery. I don't think that you're helping your children or your marriage if that's going to be what you do.
That's sound advice. I love it.
Yeah, and we often don't feel like Joe works either, so we understand.
Don't tell my wife; she's wondering what I'm doing.
So, Greg, just shifting gears a little bit. You've been around technology for a long time. You've seen a lot of innovations come and go. We're at the dawn of AI and all these LLMs that seem to be proliferating the market. Talk to us about how you think, if you were a CEO of an organization, how would you be thinking about things? And maybe more specifically, what areas or what functions within the organization do you think are going to be affected most? And just generally, how do you see things, playing out in the long run? I know we've talked about this over beers, but, would love to have you share your thoughts.
So I think you have to, so specifically to generative AI, I think that if you're a CEO, you need to, in fairly short order, probably within whatever your compensation plan cycle is, you need to figure out where your value chain, who your customers are going to be in the future, and what value chain is going to serve those customers, and where you play in that value chain, and how you play in that value chain. I mean, let's just take an example we can all identify with. we're all of the generation where when we were 16 or 17, we got our licenses and we couldn't wait for that first car. And we drove as much as we could drive. And as we had made more money, we bought fancier and fancier and faster cars, probably. Not that you guys have nice cars. And, that was our culture, right? And it goes back to a culture in the U.S. that cars were freedom with, the highway bill and everything else. But in today's world, that's not the case, right? It's very clear the trend in today's world is the future generations just want mobility. They want to get from point A to point B with the lowest carbon footprint and with the highest degree of comfort and the experience that's right for them during that moment of movement. And so that is yes, everybody needs to get around from A to B, but it's not going to be buying cars anymore. It's going to be participating in mobility service programs. Now, Uber is a disruptor in that space, as is Lyft. Now, we thought originally it was disrupting taxis and livery, but it's turning out it's disrupting much more. There are people now I know that don't have cars; they just use to go around. It is their mobility experience, right? And you can see a future where, does Mercedes-Benz partner with Delta down in Atlanta to form a new type of alliance, which is a mobility alliance? So it's not just an air travel alliance that can get you from any airport to any other airport in the world, but then it can get you from any endpoint to any endpoint in the world, right? And who takes what role in that type of a partnership? But if you believe that in each industry there's a version of this, and we could spend an hour just talking about what each version of those things are, then you know that you need to rethink how do you participate in that value creation for that new customer, for that new outcome that is being required by that customer. And it's not an easy walk for the automobile manufacturers to be the orchestrators and the owners of the customer the way they have been in the past, in the future. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be thinking about it and figuring out what their role is, but they may not be the orchestrator ultimately of those experiences. So if I'm a CEO, I'm thinking, and then of course AI is accelerating all that, right? So there's been a secular trend since the internet and public cloud allowed for businesses to offer these digital experiences, these quote digital natives. We mentioned Uber, Airbnb. There's so many of them out there right now. AI just turbocharges that because now it takes the cost of human capital out as well to launch new businesses and new outcomes. So if internet and public cloud took out the cost of interoperability and globalization, which they certainly did, AI also takes away the cost of acquiring and retaining human capital to produce value. That's ultimately what generative AI does. And so incredibly large businesses will be built tomorrow with a handful of humans and a lot of technology. We will have our first single person unicorn in the not too distant future, in my opinion. So if I'm a CEO, coming back and finishing the answer to your question, I need to figure out, where is my company going to participate next? What is my roadmap to get there? Who are the firms I need to partner with to get there versus where I need to deploy my own capital, make acquisitions, restructure, whatever I'm doing. And that should then inform my technology adoption decisions. And what we see today, Vince, really is most companies are more on the tactical end. They're going, oh, I can use AI to make things more efficient, which is just a way of saying to use less people to do the same thing. And therefore I can reduce costs of operations, which is just another way of saying I can reduce the number of people that I have doing things on, back office, front office, middle office, doesn't matter.
Right.
It's a cost out play. And that's good. And that's good in the short term. But if you're really paying attention, what is that next business model? Who is that next customer, and where do you participate?
Yeah.
So just really fascinating, Greg. I'm just thinking, as somebody who's starting their career, what advice would you give to them with relation to leveraging AI to create value for themselves and to differentiate themselves in today's marketplace and to maximize value for them?
So I think there's two layers to what AI gives us immediately if we're thinking about people entering the market. The first is you can be a founder now. I think AI layered onto public cloud and internet and everything. It's all layered, right? I think we're at a point now where our ability to unleash the creative power for value creation has been democratized.
Yes.
Right? It used to be, if you think about it, when I entered the job market 40 years ago, you had to go to certain schools, you had to have certain education, you had to go through curricular career paths, right? And if you were a founder of something without the internet, like for you to scale your business, very few people could do that. That was a lot. You now can have a kid anywhere in the world who is highly creative and insightful and come up with a good idea, and with this latest technology stack and very little capital, create an incredibly valuable thing. And I think that's good for all of us.
So do you see a future where there's, literally, hundreds of thousands or just millions of new entrepreneurs just are being generated every year?
I think we are, I got to be careful about this but I think the average size of a company will shrink for two reasons. One, human capital, having big companies slows you down because humans are slow to change. And two, humans that are trapped is a bad word. Humans in a company typically are siloed into roles that limit the degree to which their creativity can be applied to value. And so I think you're going to see many, many more small, innovative companies that can take advantage of all this tech to create entirely new value that we couldn't even imagine with a big company. And there'll be many of them, and so I do think we're entering into an era that's exciting for the individual. And again, you can be in any economic circumstance as long as you have access. Not everybody does. I recognize that. We all recognize that. But if you even have marginal access, there are things you can do that are quite extraordinary. And I think so little of human potential is unlocked. And we've talked about this. Our education system, very broken. It actually inhibits value creation, in my opinion, rather than enhances it. I just think this democratizes everything. But then the other more practical thing is, yes, there will be a lot of jobs eliminated, including traditional IT jobs, in short order. You've all seen the viral demos on the internet of the AI coding agent that can now fix bugs in software.
Yep.
We're not far from scaling, what we call application management or application outtasking. A lot of those functions will go to AI. But novel ideas and creation are still the provenance of humans. And there's going to be a whole new set of things that need to be developed that if you know the basic tools of generative AI and you're facile in them, you're going to either have your choice of career opportunity if you want to work for a company, and or if you want to take a shot at being a founder, you have that opportunity in a very different way than you had previously.
Agreed.
So we all have sort of pivotal moments in our career, and obviously your career has taken an interesting journey. As you look back, and obviously a lot of the experiences you're sharing now are based on your life experience. As you look back, what are some of those key pivotal moments that impacted your career and your journey to where you are today?
One moment was when I did make the decision in college not to pursue my original plan, which was, set me off in a very different direction than I would have otherwise gone. The second was when I realized that the IT outsourcing business was not one I was capable of scaling into. and I switched to doing custom application development. Then there was a pivotal moment. Probably the most pivotal was the entry to and the exit from the startup. The entry to was, look, I'm leaving behind, 16 years of effort and investment, and I'm just making a big bet on something that is completely unknown. I believed in it. Don't get me wrong. I did. I was passionate about it. I really thought it was going to be a huge home run, but it's still scary to walk away from everything that you've built to start something new. And I'm still amazed sometimes when I look back on it. I must have been really sick of what I was doing to do that, because it was not a rational decision by any stretch of the imagination, because I was doing pretty well by then with my company. And then the other pivotal moment for me was on the exit of that, which was, okay, do I go back and try to restart my company, or do I acknowledge that, maybe having worked for myself in my own, or living in my own stink, as they say, for 20 years, in a sense, maybe I should go work for some companies and figure out what that's about. And so my decision upon exit from the startup to go work for a company called Scient, which is now part of Razorfish, what we know today as Razorfish, that was also a pivotal moment, and when I did, I knew it was the right decision the first day, because I got there and I'm like, oh my God, this is my tribe. These are my people. Because Scient had attracted a bunch of PwC and Booz Allen. Like these were heavy hitters that Scient had attracted early on in its formation. And so I'm like, these, I think like them. I resonate with them. I look at what they've done and I want to do that. And to me, that was really probably the smartest thing I ever did, was to go to Scient instead of going backwards and trying to restart my old company.
So in terms of, a lot of things that have happened in your life that have led to a lot of the success and experiences that you've had, it typically, with everybody, involves people, right? And I know you've mentioned one mentor is Jay. Is there any other mentors in your early career that really stand out?
Early career, no, because I was too arrogant and self-absorbed to be able to take that nourishment from another person. And that's really what it is to me. It's nourishment, right? We nourish each other. You said it's all about people. That's the other big transition in my career. Like I said, I was a hardcore engineer, a little bit on the spectrum, and a believer in the power of value creation for value creation itself, not recognizing that value is ultimately in the eye of the beholder. The beholder is always a person. And if you're not recognizing that everything you're doing is for the benefit of people and with people, you're missing a trick. So I have had some good mentors. I had a guy named David at Scient who, like me, didn't have a traditional Big Four, Big Six at the time background, or Booz Allen, right? But he and I kind of bonded, I think, because both of us realized we had found our tribe, yet we'd come there from a non-traditional route. He had been on the, he'd been executive at PBNA, Pepsi Bottling. So he was a real influence for me. And then, I've had several, including when I came into EY before Jay, another guy, Hank. I've been lucky. I've had some really good people who have been willing to invest time in me and to where I could be vulnerable, because ultimately to really get the benefit, I think, of mentorship, you have to be vulnerable.
Right.
Otherwise, you're not receiving the message, right? You have to receive messages through your emotional channel, not through your intellectual channel, to really internalize them. We all know that. And B, the person that's mentoring you has got to know what you're thinking, right, and what you're feeling in order to be effective as a mentor. So,
Sure.
to me, I totally agree. It's all about people. It always has been about people. It always will be about people. And the more that you can be comfortable with people allow yourself to be appropriately vulnerable from people and get nourishment from people, as well as give nourishment, because you've got to give to get, the more successful you're going to be. I think it's really that simple.
I think that's great advice, and to tie it into what you started your career, you're very passionate about what you were doing, and then you had to have the ability to go and sell to people, so be able to interact with people, and being able to combine that passion with the ability to build strong relationships with people. And now, if you add to that AI, right, the ability to accelerate your value, if you can understand what people want and need, and the ability to deliver that at a low cost or a fraction of the cost, has completely changed over recent years with AI. But the power of the relationship still remains.
Yeah, it's the intersection of the power of technology to create tangible value with your power of relationship to create true value.
So, Greg, I know as head of global partnerships for EY, my understanding, it's been a tremendous success story since you've been in that role. If you could share with us how you got into that role, maybe some of the key decisions that you made along the way, if you can share, give us some appreciation for the growth that you experienced there, and just what that journey's been like for you.
So that was actually another pivot point of my career, was taking this role. Now, the truth is, I didn't necessarily embrace this role at first. I was more, we have this thing in the UI we call being voluntold, and I was voluntold into the role. And it turns out that was probably professionally one of the best things that ever happened to me, because I had done everything else. I've done every other role in professional services and most in tech as well. And so the one thing I hadn't done, certainly worked with partners, but the one thing I'd never done is run partnerships and run the function and try to figure out how to maximize the value the enterprise could generate through partnership to our customers could really be amped up. And so it turned out to be the sort of a big growth opportunity for me personally and professionally, which I'm really grateful for. It also turned out to be pretty good for EY because I didn't have any preconceived notions about how to think about partnering. I certainly knew how other firms did it. I certainly knew how we did it at IBM, which is where I had been before.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't go in saying, all right, I'm just going to copy and paste. I felt like all the models I had seen up until that point were okay at best. They weren't really good.
Mm.
So when I took the role, I said, let's reinvent partnering. Let's reinvent value creation through multi-party. And without getting into the details of that, that's probably not for this discussion, but we created a strategy and an operating model and an approach to the market, which had a surprisingly, I made a big, bold prediction. I predicted to my executive board that over a period of 7-8 years, we would grow to 30% CAGR. We actually grew closer to 40%.
Wow.
We were 45% of the growth of EY the last 7 years, which, is quite extraordinary. And we are now about 20% overall of EY's revenue. We started at less than 3%. So it's been a really fun and impactful journey. But the thing to me that's been the most impactful is by partnering, we are able to do things for our clients that we couldn't otherwise do by ourselves. And therefore, going back to where we started this conversation, we really are making it about what is the outcome the client wants, and then how do we as EY orchestrate that outcome with our partners. That's really, if I boil it down to its very essence, that's been the approach. Versus, hey, we've got an alliance with SAP, we need to go out and sell SAP software, which is what a lot of our competitors think about it. And there's a lot of clients that'll buy it that way, but to me, that's not value accretive or as value accretive as it should be. And so it's that thought process that has really underpinned this and has been the reason for the insane growth that we've had the last 7 years.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Phenomenal. Well, It is time, guys. You know what it's time for?
It's time for the lightning round.
Drum
Oh
roll.
boy. This is torture. I'm a thoughtful person. This is gonna be hard. All right, let's go. Let's go.
Ready? Let's go.
I'm ready.
Okay, first question. If you had a Neuralink chip implanted into your head, would you allow it? Actually, no. Let's start that again.
Yes, I would, because I would want to use it to monitor my health and make better decisions about my health in the long term.
Okay,
right.
There we go. Who's been the most influential person in your life?
Honestly, it's my current spouse, Maisie. She has been incredibly influential and put me on a path to living a long, healthy life. So for that, I'm very grateful. In fact, I'm here because of her. So there's that.
Shout out to Maisie.
Favorite TV show?
Probably Ozark.
Huh? What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh gosh, there's so many. It's along the lines of you really need to understand when you're selling, you really need to put yourself in the head of the other person. Stop thinking about you, make it about them. Very basic, but still a question.
A lot easier said than done.
Oh yeah.
Much easier said than done.
What's the longest flight you've ever had?
Singapore 1 from New York to Singapore direct nonstop.
How many hours?
Oh God, 16. It's long. It's the longest flight you can take. The other one is to South Africa.
Yeah, done that one. Favorite karaoke song? We should know this.
It would have to be one of the ones that we did in Florida, and I'll just leave it at that.
Sweet Caroline.
Sweet Caroline. There we go.
There we go. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would that be?
So my answer to that is everywhere. I am a person that I live on the road. To me, the planet is incredible, and I don't want to limit myself to any one place. Now, for a home base, it's Atlanta and Florida, as you guys know. The Southeast. I love the Southeast of the U.S. now, but I want to live everywhere, a week or two at a time.
There you go.
Sounds fun. So what hobby or interest do you have that most people don't know about?
My hobby is fixing stuff. I've got an incredible tool collection, and in fact, for my retirement dinner, my awesome team, and I love them to death, they got me a construction hat with an EY logo on it and a tool belt in yellow leather that said Greg the Builder. That was the best gift I ever got in my life. I love it.
Love that. So next question, what's the longest conference call you've ever had?
The longest what?
The longest conference call you've ever had?
Oh, I've been on like 10-hour calls.
That sounds way worse than the flight.
Not many, thankfully. I try to keep them short, like everybody, but I've had some things where I've had to be on calls like a full day.
All right, and then the last question, I think this ties back to the previous question. How many houses have you redone all the electrical wiring?
Well, it's not just electrical wiring in general, but probably
Plumbing,
5.
roofing.
5?
5?
Yeah,
that's
it's probably
good.
5. Where I've done it personally, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. Those are the 10 questions for them.
All right. Well,
I got through it.
Your answers were good, so I gave you more than 5 seconds. I let you think about it, right?
yes, you might be our best performing guest in the lightning round. You'll get that distinction.
Yes.
Yep.
Very thoughtful.
But listen, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time. It was great. I learned stuff about you and your career I had no idea about. This was amazing. Really, thanks for doing it. If anybody'd like to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
The best way to get me is by LinkedIn. I'm the only Sarafin. You see my name on the screen. You search for Greg Sarafin, you will absolutely find me. I do a lot of interaction on LinkedIn, and then switch to other channels as appropriate. Yep. So that's the best way.
Is there anything you'd like to plug to our legion of fans out there?
millions and millions of fans.
No, I actually, I'll plug Skillstorm. I think a lot of you guys, you have a business model that isn't just about profit, although you have to have profit for your shareholders, otherwise you won't be in a business, or you won't be able to promote and grow your business, promote your employees. But I really love the fact that you bring in the social impact piece to it as well. You know, military and people in disadvantaged zip codes and so forth. I think that is an incredibly valuable service that you provide to our economy, and I wish more companies would think like you did.
Well, thank you very much for that, Greg. That means a lot.
It's very nice.
Well, and thanks again for being on the show.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Hey.
This episode of Opportunity Accelerators has been brought to you by Skillstorm, where our purpose as an organization is to launch and accelerate tech careers. Please be sure to like and subscribe to catch the next episode.